Hey guys, LMC here again, back with another video. Today we're going to talk about my PC. So back when I made my I'm Back video, I talked about one of the projects I did when I was away, which was to upgrade and watercool this PC. And a few people asked about it. A few people wanted to know about the PC specifically, but also a few people mentioned that they didn't really know what watercooling a PC really involved. So I thought I'd take this chance to kind of broadly touch on and explain what's involved. So this is my PC here. In terms of the specs, it's a Gigabyte Z87 G1 Sniper motherboard, which is a Haswell chipset. And so I've got a Core i7-4770K in here, which is overclocked to 4.4 gigahertz. I've also got 16 gigs of Corsair Vengeance RAM and two GTX 780 Ti's from EVGA. I've also got an SSD boot drive, hard drive for games, but all that stuff's pretty basic. And it's all packed inside my Corsair Air 540 case. This is a great case. This is the first time I've actually used a cube style case. So as you can see, it's got a very large footprint. It's got a very large compartment at the back here, which is really nice actually, because it allows you kind of stuff all this stuff in the back that you don't really care about, and then you can just focus on making this look pretty. Now, in terms of water cooling, it's kind of appropriate that actually the audience of my channel is concerned with motorcycles, because the way this water-cooling PC works is actually fundamentally very similar to the way a water-cooled bike works. So basically both of them work. You have something that generates heat, so in the case of the bike, the engine, in the case of my computer, the GPU and the CPU chips. And basically what you need to do is you need to, of course, move heat away from those heat sources and push it out into the atmosphere to keep those things running at their nominal temperature. So in your bike, what happens is the heat moves from the engine to a body of coolant or a body of liquid, and then via a series of pipes, though that liquid is moved away from the engine to a radiator using a pump, and then air from the atmosphere moves through the radiator, which transfers the heat from the fluid out into the atmosphere, and then the fluid is moved back through the engine via another set of pipes, and that's what completes the loop. The same thing in principle works here. So basically what you have is you have what are called water blocks. So this black square thing here is a CPU water block. Then these two black plates here are the GPU water blocks. And basically what they do is, if you imagine my left hand is a chip, so it's the GPU or the CPU, basically what you have is you have a water block, which is my right hand. You have a bit of thermal grease in between the two of them, and you sort of sandwich them together. And then basically what happens is that heat from the chipset moves via the thermal grease onto a copper base plate on the water block, and then on the other side of the water block you have like water channels or fins, and then water moves across that side of the water block, and that's essentially how the heat moves from the chip to the body of water. Now that's quite important, because obviously if you introduce water straight to the chipset, it would short circuit, it would fry it out. So so the water block allows you to essentially move the heat away from the chip to the water without the water ever coming in direct contact with the chip. So that's something that quite a lot of people don't understand, because they kind of, the moment you think of a delicate thing like a computer and fluid like water, you think of them together, you think, oh, that's really bad, that's going to cause a nightmare. But that's essentially how it works. It works via a set of water blocks. So in my PC, what happens is that there is a pump and a reservoir in the back of the case, in the back section, which you can't see. And what happens is that the pump feeds water through this pipe down the bottom here into this radiator. Water runs through this radiator, comes out of this pipe, comes up here to the bottom GPU, runs through the bottom GPU, then runs through this bridge to the top GPU, runs through the top GPU, then runs out from the GPU in this pipe, goes into the CPU, comes out of the CPU, up into this radiator, and then on the other side of this radiator there's an outlet which feeds into the back of the case, and that outputs the water into the reservoir, and then the water is connected back to the pump. Sorry, the reservoir is connected to the pump, and that completes the circuit. So and of course what I have to do is I mount fans onto the radiators in order to move air through the radiators constantly and push the heat out into the atmosphere. So I've got 3 fans mounted to this one on the front. You can't actually see it, they're behind the grill here. They bring in cool air from the outside of the case, move it through this radiator, push it into the case, and then these 2 fans mounted on this radiator push air out through the top. So that in principle is how it works. Now the next question is, well, why would you bother? So If you don't water cool your PC, because you don't have to, and if you do, it's quite expensive. It takes a lot of time, and the components all add up to quite a lot of money. So why would you bother? Well, the reason you bother with it is because water cooling is a much more efficient way, or much more effective way of cooling your computer than what's called air cooling. So if you have a stock cooler on your CPU, you're what's called air cooling your PC, and basically it works the same way. You move heat from the chip to a heat sink, a large sort of heat sink which is made up of pipes, copper pipes generally, and aluminium fins, etc., which are attached to the pipes, and then you mount fans onto those fins and you blow cool air over the fins, and then that essentially performs the same cooling process. But water cooling is much more efficient. So these two GPUs, for example, my two 780 Ti's, the way they're designed is they're designed to run at about 80 degrees Celsius under load, and that's by design from NVIDIA. And what NVIDIA's drivers do is they turn the speed of the card up or down in order to maintain that 80 degree temperature. So if it's a really hot day and the card starts to get to 85 degrees, they'll turn the GPU down a little bit to maintain the 80 degree temperature range. Now, to give you some context with my system, when I'm playing a game and both of these GPUs are sort of around 80 to 90% load, they run on a nice cool day, on a nice 20 degree day, they run at about 40 degrees Celsius, so half the temperature. And even on hot days, so 25 degrees up to 30 degrees and up, these two graphics cards never go over 50 degrees Celsius. So it's a much, much cooler operating temperature. And the same goes for the CPU. Now, there are a few advantages to this. So the first one is that it gives you more overclocking room. So as I mentioned before, you can adjust your component speed and you kind of balance that against the amount of temperature they output, because the hotter these things run, the more likely they are to die, and you know, the hotter they run over long periods of time will shorten their life. So if you can run it cooler, then you can actually overclock it more. And being able to overclock it more gives you essentially more bang for your buck. It allows you to squeeze more performance out of your components and without any additional cost apart from the water cooling loop. So that's a great advantage. The other advantage is, which I touched on just before, is that it extends the life of your product. So even though the GPUs, for instance, are designed to run at 80 degrees, if you run them at 80 degrees 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they will eventually die. And the more you run them at that temperature, the more likely they are to approach their own death, essentially. So by running these at only 40 to 50 degrees under load, I get more life out of them. Same goes for the CPU. And the third benefit is acoustics. So I mentioned before I've got the fans mounted to the radiators. Well, I have these fans essentially set to a constant speed, and I set them to a speed that I find imperceptible, so I can't hear it. So they're nice and quiet. And the real advantage to that is it means that this PC, no matter whether I'm working on a Word document, browsing Facebook, editing a video for you guys, playing a 3D game, or crunching some numbers for my PhD, this PC always produces the same amount of sound. And that sound is basically whisper quiet. So it allows you to maintain really, really effective cooling at really, really good acoustics, which I really like. And finally, I mean, it's a personal thing. I think it looks great. If you do it well, if you run the piping nicely, if you get a decent color scheme. This PC is not perfect because, as you can see, I've kind of gone for a green and white kind of theme, but the green on my cables doesn't match the green on my motherboard, which is a pain in the ass. But anyway, I still think it looks pretty good. If you go on Google and look at water-cooled PCs, you can see a massive range of water-cooled PCs. Some of them are dreadful, and some of them are just incredible, immaculate, and would cost like 10 grand or something like that. But I'm really proud of the way I've done this. I think it looks good for my first attempt. So that's why I did it. Yeah, so that's essentially it. If you have any questions, like always, don't hesitate to drop them in the comment section below, and I'll let you know. And until next time, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, guys. See ya.